Over the last few years, microdosing psychedelics have really come on the scene to help people with mood, energy, and specifically with depression. There are a lot of people who are starting to reevaluate their relationship with Prozac and Zoloft and other classic antidepressants, the SSRIs, but also the SNRIs, and they're looking to microdosing psychedelics as a potential replacement. And so in today's video, we're going to talk about the pros and cons. We're going to talk about some of the differences of microdosing psychedelics versus the classic antidepressants, so you have a full understanding before you move forward potentially with microdosing yourself. Now, before we get into that, make sure you subscribe to Third Wave YouTube channel so you can stay up to date and informed about all of the latest educational developments in the psychedelic space. So in today's video, microdosing can be broken down into two main substances, LSD and psilocybin. A lot of people are utilizing either LSD or psilocybin as a replacement for traditional antidepressants, SSRIs and SNRIs. Some examples of these would be Prozac and Zoloft and Lexapro. And so what's interesting about antidepressants is we've been using them for more than 40 years. So we have a lot of longitudinal data about them. And what we've recently discovered is that antidepressants are actually no more effective than placebo. So placebo is often helpful in about 40% of the cases. Antidepressants are also helpful in about 40% of the cases. Antidepressants often have pretty high efficacy within the first 3 months, but after that, their efficacy significantly tapers off. So usually about a year after someone has started taking antidepressants, there's not necessarily a lot of support and help through that. And one of the reasons for that is because antidepressants act on something called the 5-HT1A receptor, which is one of many serotonin receptors in the brain. And this is different than the classic psychedelics. The classic psychedelics act on something called the 5-HT2A receptor. So antidepressants are the 1A receptor, psychedelics are the 2A receptor. Now, Robin Carhart Harris, who is one of the prominent researchers in the psychedelic landscape, published a research paper a few years ago showing and comparing the differences of antidepressants versus psychedelics, focusing on what I just mentioned, the 5-HT1A versus the 5-HT2A. And what he explained and communicated through that research paper is what antidepressants do by activating the 5-HT1A receptor is they numb our response to what is going on. So they essentially dampen the emotional response. So in case we are suicidal or in case we have a really low mood, what it does is it puts a nice sheen over that. So we no longer want to commit suicide, or we feel a little more ebullient on an everyday basis. But that numbing, while effective in the short term, is not effective in the long term, because when we numb the bad, we also numb the good. So what people find is that when they're working with antidepressants, they eventually just become numb to life itself. And what that means is all of these emotions then get repressed and repressed and repressed, and all of life essentially just gets compartmentalized and repressed. Oftentimes people experience this thing of anhedonia on antidepressants, where life just feels gray and bleak. Now, psychedelics are very different. Psychedelics, because they activate the 5-HT2A receptor, they actually create an opening which confronts the material that is difficult. So psychedelics are very confronting. They actually allow us to face what it is that's causing that depression and come to terms with it through something called catharsis. And so through that catharsis, we can actually heal and integrate the repressed emotion and stories rather than just numbing ourselves to it on an ongoing basis. And high doses of psychedelics are really effective at that initial catharsis. However, not everyone is ready to jump in the deep end right away with high doses of psychedelics. So there are a lot of people who are looking at microdosing psychedelics to take that first step in. And so if you are considering that, there's a couple things that you need to be mindful of. First and foremost, psychedelics, LSD and psilocybin specifically, are not contraindicated with any of the classic SSRIs and SNRIs. And what that means is there's not going to be any negative physiological reaction if you're on Prozac or Zoloft and you decide that you want to start microdosing in addition to that. Now, with that being said, if you do intend to do that, make sure you do that under the tutelage of a trained medical professional, preferably a psychiatrist. Do not do this by yourself. A lot of people are finding success weaning off those typical antidepressant medications with the help of microdosing. And there's a couple of contextual things that will be good for you to be aware of. If you're on an SSRI, it means you're a lot more numb to what is going on. And so typically people, when they start to microdose, will need a slightly higher amount. So if the classic microdose of psilocybin is 100 milligrams, if someone has been on SSRIs for a very long time, they might need to go slightly higher as a way to experience the actual benefits of microdosing. The other thing to be mindful of is for SNRIs, it's inverted. So people who are on an SNRI are actually more sensitive to psychedelics. So if a normal microdose is 100 milligrams of psilocybin, then it's best to start with somewhere in the 50 milligram range. Now, again, if you're going to do this, do so with the help of a psychiatrist. And if you don't have a psychiatrist or a medical professional in your corner who knows a lot about psychedelics, go to Third Wave's directory, thethirdwave.co, and you can find a qualified, trained medical professional who can support you through this process. So we covered a lot in today's video. Antidepressants, Prozac, Zoloft, Lexapro, these often numb us to life's experiences. Psychedelics allow for a catharsis, a revitalization, more energy, an awakening. And so what matters most is that if you're planning to microdose psychedelics, instead of utilizing these medications, you can use psychedelics to wean off these medications. And if you're planning to fully go off those medications, make sure you do so with the help of a medical professional. Now, when we look at LSD versus psilocybin, what we often tell people is start with psilocybin. It is a normal, organic compound. A lot of people are sort of turned off by the Prozacs and the Zolofts, the synthetic nature of these compounds. So if you're going to work with microdosing, start with psilocybin, start low and go slow. And if you really want to go full in on microdosing, make sure to check out Third Wave's microdosing course. We have a link for that in the description for you to get more details about Third Wave's microdosing course. Thanks so much for watching. For a deeper dive into the power of microdosing with complimentary practice and extra guidance, check out our best-selling microdosing course. It's a science-based protocol with dozens of best practices so you can customize your protocol to your unique needs and goals. Check out the link in the description below.